How far ahead can we predict marine heat waves? And did the U.S. just reach its goal early to halve federal building emissions? Welcome to the Climate Recap from the Beckisphere Climate Corner, your go-to place for international and U.S.-based climate news. I'm Becky Hogue, a science writer. Today is Earth Day, April 22nd. Let's jump right into the news you need to start your day. Let's start with some climate events. While the flooding in South Africa itself was unusually bad, the death toll reflects a housing crisis. In 2009, hundreds of poor residents of the capital were moved to a flood-prone area for the World Cup. They still don't have stable housing or flood protection. A tragic example of how long overlooked issues are compounding now and disproportionately impacting lower-income communities. As the New York Times article points out, quote, "The catastrophe has underscored an often overlooked reality of the fight against extreme weather. Protecting people is as much about tackling social issues as environmental ones." In Arizona, a wildfire has forced thousands around Flagstaff to flee their homes. The wind-stoked tunnel fire tripled in size Wednesday, already burning an area the size of Manhattan. This area, like the space that burned in New Mexico recently, is experiencing a mega drought. Over half of the U.S. is in a drought right now. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, can predict marine heat waves a year before they happen. This new study, published in the journal Nature, is the first attempt to forecast these events, though there have been many studies looking at the drivers of these events. Marine heat waves are similar to terrestrial heat waves in that they disrupt ecosystems. In the ocean, they can cause algal blooms, food chain fluctuations, displacement of ocean habitats, and displacement of animal populations. This can impact fisheries, tourism, and weather on land. So predicting it is beneficial to conservation and preparation. Now for some climate change victories. The Delhi High Court in India Wednesday asked the government to respond to a public interest litigation seeking the constitution of an expert committee to be tasked with laying out how India will meet its commitments to be net zero emissions by 2070. These targets would need to be long-term, mid-term, and short-term. Over in Europe, the European Commission is considering raising its renewable energy target for 2030 from 40% to 45%. They think this move away from Russian fossil fuels will make the higher target more likely to be achieved. Germany is trying to drop Russian oil imports by the end of this year, so we'll have to keep an eye on how that goes. As Europe's largest economy, Germany might indicate how the rest of Europe shifts. Meanwhile, Zurich, Switzerland shut off the gas supply in some neighborhoods to decrease household emissions. This wasn't an overnight decision, as the city was working to make this move for the climate for over 10 years. It instead has connected residential buildings to a waste incinerator with all the latest pollution controls to heat homes and water, then electrify everything else. Single-family homes that couldn't connect to the district heating system were helped to buy heat pumps instead. Zurich's goal is to get everyone off fossil fuels by 2040. This move came at a good time as they want to get off Russian fossil fuels too. The United Nations Environment Program just honored 95-year-old Sir David Attenborough with the title of Champion of the Earth. Attenborough said we must take action to protect the planet as he was accepting the award. Attenborough is a respected broadcaster, biologist, natural historian, and author. He voiced A Plastic Ocean and A Green Planet. 52-year-old British climate activist Angus Rose just ended his 37-day hunger strike after an all-party parliament group agreed to hold a publicly televised briefing on climate change in May or June. It will be led by the UK government's chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance. Rose originally wanted a televised briefing from the cabinet, but he accepted this. During his hunger strike, 79 leading scientists sent a letter backing him, including the former government chief scientific advisor David King. A new project by the startup Granular, along with several energy giants, will make it possible for electricity consumers in the UK to track renewable energy generation hourly, providing greater transparency over energy sources. People can get discounts on their bills if they prioritize using energy when renewable energy levels are up, like when it's windy or sunny. This is a good example of a product that gives consumers autonomy over their carbon footprint. Over in the United States, the Department of Interior projects adding 10 gigawatts of permitted renewable capacity on Western federal lands by the end of next year. This would get us one step closer to making the U.S. electricity sector emissions-free by 2035 through 25 gigawatts of wind, solar, and geothermal energy. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland said this when the announcement was made. Quote, "The technological advances, increased interest, cost-effectiveness, and tremendous economic potential make these projects a promising path for diversifying our natural energy portfolio." And the Department of Transportation recently announced that it will spend $6.4 billion on projects to reduce transportation-related carbon emissions over the next 5 years. This funding comes from the infrastructure bill. This money will be distributed to states to use on projects that reduce traffic congestion and travel demand and increase public and alternative forms of transportation like bike paths. Transportation is the most carbon-heavy sector in the U.S. Meanwhile, the General Services Administration, which is responsible for helping federal agencies build, purchase, and renovate office spaces, announced that it has cut its building portfolio's annual operation greenhouse gas emissions by 51% compared to fiscal 2008 levels. That means that they actually already hit Biden's target of having federal building emissions cut by 50% by 2032, a decade early. Maybe that means he'll consider making the next target of 100% by 2045 a few years earlier. Now for a neutral news point. Shell is urging its shareholders to reject a climate resolution by a Dutch activist group Follow This. The group is trying to get the fossil fuel company to more stringently uphold Paris Climate Accord standards. While Shell has said it would go net zero by 2050, this is largely lip service as it doesn't include emissions from its products. Confident that its shareholders will side with them, Shell is letting them vote between its current emissions reduction plan and the Follow This plan. This has already been tried before, and only 30% of shareholders voted for the Follow This plan. We'll have to wait a month to see if opinions have changed. Now for some climate fails. The banking institute JP Chase released a new study that states that the world needs an extra $1.3 trillion in investment in energy by 2030 to avoid an energy crunch. They're referring to all energy sources getting money. They think a 20% increase in energy demand will be needed to lift people out of poverty. This includes 10% increase in demand for oil and 18% increase in demand for gas. The report specifically says that solar panels cannot replace the need for oil. This attitude lines up with the company's investment history. JP Morgan is by far the number one fossil fuel supporting bank in the world, despite claiming on its website that its climate goals line up with the International Energy Agency's emissions reductions roadmap. This projection, their pledge, and their actions all directly contradict what the IEA says, which is that we should stop financing fossil fuels completely and immediately. You can learn more about how your money is being used to fund fossil fuel projects in a new YouTube video made by Climatown. Over to Asia. China joins India in upping its Russian fossil fuel imports, which are currently at discounted prices. Specifically, China has doubled its coking coal used in steel production. I haven't talked about China in a little while because it's kind of all the same thing right now. They're doubling down on coal during this time while talking about different avenues for upping renewables. Understandably, they're a huge developing country dealing with an energy crisis and COVID lockdowns, but they are nowhere near on track to heading towards decarbonization. I will let you know if anything changes. Meanwhile, Australian environmentalists don't seem to have a vote in this upcoming Prime Minister election. Both of the country's main parties back fossil fuels. Both the Coalition and Labour support coal exports and think that we can solve climate change by slowly switching to gas and then relying on hydrogen and carbon capture. Carbon capture still has yet to be proven at any large scale and should be used to make up for emissions in hard to decarbonize sectors, but not expected to do the whole job. And while Prime Minister Scott Morrison insists that gas is replacing coal as a cleaner form of energy, there's actually been no proof to say that gas is replacing domestic coal production. It's just being exported to Asia. Over to South America, Brazil is considering upping its oil output with the US as the US tries to move away from Russian fossil fuels. Increasing oil production could result in further Amazon rainforest deforestation, and Brazil itself has said that it would take time to build up supply. Now over to the US. A new report by a coalition of environmental groups found that the Oregon State Treasury has at least $5.3 billion invested in fossil fuels. Oregon State as in the state, not as in the university, for clarification. Over $1 billion of it is invested in coal. Oregon is known as a clean state, but this tacked on with the recent paper calling Oregon's rivers the most polluted in the country, and I'm not so sure. The organizations, of course, demanded the state divests. Now here's a piece of chemical news. Los Angeles County announced that it will ban single-use dishes and cutlery, requiring items to be widely compostable or recyclable by 2023. The key word there is widely for recyclable, because many containers that have recycled signs with the number in the middle aren't able to be recycled everywhere. Most can't. Another problem will be figuring out how to improve the recycling process when items have food on them. Consumers don't have the best record of washing everything before it's recycled. But the new rule will ban expanded polystyrene foam and require every sit-down restaurant to provide reusable dishes and cutlery as well. Lastly, I want to tell you about earthday.com. No, this is not a sponsorship. The site itself has an event at noon Eastern Daylight Time called Nature in the Race to Zero. But it also shows you where and when events are happening near you. Apparently, I have an electric car show near me tomorrow. And that was your climate news for Friday, April 22nd. If you like the work I do, please follow this podcast, give it a 5-star rating, leave a review, and consider checking out the Beckisphere Climate Corner YouTube channel. Remember to talk about the climate crisis every single day and to support your local news organizations. I hope you all have a fabulous Earth Day.